Joe Smith, and I have the honor to be president of MetroPlan this year and next. And, you know, we were talking about making our next 20-year plan and how we're going to get there and where we need to go. And Tab had a great idea that he thought this would be a perfect time for us to get some of the more experienced mayors and county judges together and kind of tell us what was going through their mind in the early 90s when they were making the plan back in those days. And so we want to pick and choose some of the things that they're going to say. They're going to give us some advice. They're going to tell us some things that they did right and some things that they did wrong. And I know I've seen some other mayors here tonight and some of my city council. I'm certainly glad y'all are here so we can hear what these guys have got to say. Because this plan that we're getting ready to put together is really what's going to happen in Central Arkansas in the next 20 years. So I want to say thank you for Tab having the idea and putting it together, and certainly our panelists that are going to be here. Let me introduce them. They'll all come out together. First is Judge Buddy Villines. Buddy was Pulaski County Judge for 24 years, from 91 to 2014. Mayor Jim Dailey, Mayor of Little Rock for 14 years, from 1993 to 2006. And Mayor Pat Hayes, Mayor of North Little Rock for 24 years, from 1989 to 2012. So these guys have got a world of experience, no doubt. And joining us as the moderator is Steve Barnes, who's host of AETN's Arkansas Weekly, and he's highly respected, longtime TV journalist. And we're certainly glad that Steve would give up some of his time to come and wrestle these guys around. So please welcome your panel.
Well, as long as you can hear these guys, that's the important part. Townsville did promise water out here, and I see he's let down. This is kind of what it is, an extraordinary event. They call themselves the Three Amigos, which is not inappropriate, but it seemed to me that the ruling triumvirate was probably a bit more not necessarily Roman, but just as appropriate. I think it's remarkable, as Mayor Smith pointed out, not just that these guys, these gentlemen, had tenures that were spanned 2 decades or longer, but that the overlap was so significant. And at lunch the other day, and indeed just backstage just now, we were talking about the importance of personal relationships in intra-county or intra-governmental relations. So let's begin there. You guys not only had the time, but you had the temperament, it would seem to me, to make this trio, this triumvirate work. Mayor Hayes, let's start with you.
How long do we have, Steve? An hour and a half? Put a clock on me. Being one who says a few words in a long period of time, let me try to see if I can hold it down with my colleagues up here who I know are very bashful when it comes to the microphone. But I can remember Jim and I, our fathers were members of the Constitutional Convention of 69-70, and there were 5 father-son combinations. We were a part of the Constitutional Convention of 79-80. And, Dad and Dalton Dailey, were very good friends, and that sort of spilled over to us. Buddy, Lord, I can't even remember how long I've known Buddy, and, way before I became mayor, and certainly I'm sure before Jim became mayor. Buddy, I think, was mayor of Little Rock at one time. But we were friends, but I think before I was in office, and perhaps before they were, and it just kind of happened that we had a chance to lead our cities during a time when there were a lot of exciting things that were going on. And I know as we were talking out backstage, that's something that I think is missing in Congress right now, is the ability to get to know people. You know, I know you made a comment that folks don't even know congressmen from their own state. So I think I have to say that personal relationships are exceptionally important when it comes to making things happen. And I know Tab, Townsville, who directs MetroPlan now, was a part of that group, and I think that group facilitated us getting to know each other a lot better. And when it comes to sharing, things that we needed to make happen, it's a whole lot easier when you know and trust somebody.
Well, your question, we've talked about this a lot at different times, and each of us brought a different background. My dad was a Methodist preacher, and we moved every 4 years. And so getting to know different people from different parts of the state was kind of inbred in us growing up. Then coming into Pulaski County after I'd graduated from college, I had the good fortune while I was in college to have my parents living in North Little Rock. So I had a sense of both North Little Rock and Little Rock after I'd moved to Little Rock, and I never could quite understand what the feuding was about between the two communities. Over 100 years it lasted. And then my parents' last charge as a minister was in Jacksonville. So I had a sense a little bit more than someone who just lived in one of the cities. Then by getting to know Pat and later Jim, as we began to become in offices, we just made it a point, particularly I did, to always go talk to the others. Even when I was mayor of Little Rock, I wanted to talk to the mayor, both of the North Little Rock, but also Jacksonville and Sherwood and Maumelle, because I always sensed that there was more to it than just what stopped at the city limit line. And then as we continued to grow, and the other benefit we had, I know a lot of people want term limits. They think that's a cure-all. Let me tell you, most of the stuff that's happened in this area wouldn't have happened if we'd had term limits, because it takes time to put things together, get the right people in place, find the ways to fund it, come up with a plan, and then implement it. I think every project I worked on took a minimum of 8 years, some of them as much as 14. In 24 years, I was able to get it done. But, you had to have that. It had to be a way where people saw beyond. We could have had other people up here, by the way. Bill Harmon of Sherwood was mayor, who now we have the Jack Evans Regional Award for someone who understood. When we were doing the arena project, he was the first mayor after these two guys that I went out and talked to. And as we sat down and talked about it, he says, Sherwood needs that arena. Now, that's a big leap forward from what a lot of people would have said. That's Little Rock's or North Little Rock's. It's not ours. But every mayor in the county ended up joining that effort. And from that corpus, which at the same time we were trying to build the group that would be for countywide, we were able to do it. So as Mayor Harmon, Bill, Tommy Swain, David Kenley in Conway, several others that are all part of this. We just happened to be at that very nucleus as it began to grow. And then we used our relationships with those others, with each other and others, to put it all together.
I want to go to Mayor Dailey in just a second. But first, Buddy, Judge, do you think you were in some ways
Kind of the catalyst between the north and the south parts of the county?
Well,
A bridge.
Well,
Were you a
we,
dam bridge?
our buddy's dam bridge, as it's called sometimes, but our damn buddy's bridge. What I tried to do when I became county judge was to rethink the approach in the office. Prior to that time, the county judge was looked as only representing the unincorporated area. So you had your cities, and then outside the cities, you had the county, and that was the county judge's domain. But I'm elected by everybody in the county as county judge. So when I went in, and as opposed when I was mayor of Little Rock, I'd go talk to the mayor of North Little Rock. We'd talk about working together, but we each knew that we were dealing with two separate constituencies. We represented two separate constituencies. When I walked into as county judge to any of the mayors, they knew, and I knew, we were elected by the same people. And if you, particularly if you look at where the county's funds came from, most of it came on account of the numbers of people in the cities. And so we no longer thought of ourselves as just the unincorporated area. We thought of ourselves as really all the people of the county. And by taking that approach, you call it a bridge, it's more, I think, just looking at it as one whole community and dealing with each of the local communities as a part of the whole, as opposed to being a separate part of everything.
I think that Pat and Buddy have probably covered most of the points, but through my life, whether it was in my business or in politics or now even as tourism director for the state of Arkansas, I've always been a believer in the whole concept of the wisdom of the crowds. There's a book to that effect that was written in early 2000 that basically says that a group of individuals that have a certain amount of knowledge about a topic, if they put their brains together to work on a solution, they'll come up with the answer and a better solution than the brightest person doing it by himself or herself. And I believe in that. And so I've always felt like there were smarter people than I. I'd say Buddy and Pat are probably smarter than I am, but I was smart enough to be a partner with them in the things that we have done. After I left politics and ultimately spent time back in business again, and then ultimately the governor asked me to serve as tourism director, people began calling me the mayor of Arkansas, because the same concept applies there, that we are all one state or we're all one community, and how we work together for the betterment of whatever that entity is a success that's going to be realized. Now, when I think back about our relationship, clearly we were friends, but more than that, we each cared about our individual parts of this pie, but at the same time, we cared about something that was bigger than that as it related to the overall outcome. I can remember times we would sit, and I know you, Steve, you've heard us say it before, but at least once a year, if not a bunch of times a year, but we would get together, the three of us, and we'd sit down and say, okay, Pat Hayes, what have you got planned for North Little Rock? Buddy, what do you have planned for the county? Jim, what do you have planned for Little Rock? And we'd coalesce all that in a way to where we could come out with something that hopefully we would collectively work together on. And that's something that I believe is powerful, this collective wisdom and collective power of effort together. So clearly, as has been mentioned in previous conversations, there were a number of things that were tried before on either side of the river, whether it was to build a convention center, or whether it was to build an arena, or whatever it might have been. But until we came together and decided we were going to present this to the community as something that we were all together on, then it never did succeed. And ultimately, with private sector, with state involvement, and with the community of Pulaski County coming together, we were able to accomplish things that never would, as one of them said a moment ago, been able to accomplish without that. So clearly this friendship, but the power of this collective effort is something that has made a difference in our community.
All three of you, well, certainly the two mayors anyway,
Had, though, some nice things got done, some good things got accomplished. But it would have, well, it was, that particularly the two mayors had to be willing to cede something to the other, C-E-D-E, something to the other.
Let me mention one thing that probably isn't thought of a whole lot, that I think was one of the most challenging and one of the most difficult, and yet at the same time is going to be the most one of the most significant things. Buddy was sort of the godfather, and Jim and I were the lieutenants, at least in getting this done, and that's the merger of North Little Rock Water and Little Rock Water. Without going into the details, Little Rock, under a Supreme Court decision, was forced to serve North Little Rock, but North Little Rock was not required to buy water from Little Rock. And when we recognized that, Little Rock needed to plan for long-term water supply, but they were in a difficult position of planning for somebody that didn't have to stay with them. And at the same time, we were paying about twice the amount for our wholesale water, because we bought wholesale water from Little Rock. We didn't have any production, water production. And what would have to take place for those mergers, that merger to happen, would be, for Little Rock to either freeze or either lower its rates, because merger, at least one of the positions that we took was that rates had to equalize over a certain period of time, and that meant that Little Rock board would have to vote to either raise rates on their folks and lower them on us. In other words, we were paying twice as much, again, as Little Rock was. So, that on a short-term basis was a real political risk. Anytime you raise rates on your folks and either freeze them or lower them on somebody else. And I can remember it was a big challenge, but thanks to Jim's leadership and certainly, the long-term benefits to us, we now, because many people say water for the 21st century is going to be what oil was, to the 20th century. So I think that, to me, is unrecognized, but would give us quality water at reasonable rates because we've got a broad ratepayer base.
In on that and just say that thank you for that, Pat, but the reality of it, and people would ask me about it, I mean, being the big city, the population city and all of that, people would come to me and say, why are you giving up this? Why are we going to have to pay X number of rates for this? Why are you letting the ballpark go on the North Little Rock side of the river? That sort of conversation went on.
We got an arena too.
Sure, we got an arena as well. Now, we did get a convention center expanded over as part of the deal, but the point I'm trying to make in reality is that I always use the phrase which said, if I was mayor of both sides of the river, this is the way we would be doing it. And it made sense that way. They couldn't argue with it. They may not have liked it. They wanted to be selfish. But at the same time, in reality, it was for the best interest of all of us.
Let me just add one quick point. And being the bashful person I am, Jim did a great job with the government, but, with the city board. But we also had Joe Ford was the head of the Little Rock Chamber. And his philosophy was ratepayers, I don't care which side of the river they're on, they're my ratepayers. At the same time, the University of Arkansas at Little Rock did a special study and had some academic review of what would be best in terms of whether or not a merger or continue to operate separately. So that gave us a tremendous amount of ability and flexibility to do what we thought was in the best interest of both sides of the river. And indeed, as it has gone beyond that, folks like Jacksonville, I think Maul Mill's into it now, and so the ratepayers have grown. But that cover with Joe Ford and his leadership at the chamber and University of Arkansas at Little Rock, a special commission that was appointed committee, really helped facilitate that merger.
Well, kind of just cap that off. In the arena, the three of us got together in my office one day because they were, again, Little Rock had tried twice, North Little Rock tried once, and there was talk about building one out in the suburbs, really. And all of us had felt and looked around the country, and that's the worst thing you can do, because all you get out of is a big building that's empty most of the time and a big asphalt parking lot. There's no economic growth around it. So we wanted it downtown. And we decided we would do this big review, and we would look at the industry of concerts, sports, meetings, and all that, and bring in the other mayors in the county if they would come, which they all did. And we had a series of hearings all around the county, really, and we let people come out with ideas. But we also decided at that meeting that the last thing we're going to decide is where that arena will be. None of us went into it with presupposed. Maybe there were some thought favorite places, but we went into it with that. And we had some great hearings. We don't have time for me to tell you some of the funny things that came out, but a dome over War Memorial Stadium was the best, I thought. But anyway, at the end, right as we were finishing, there were people working on riverfront development on both sides of the river. And they are the ones that together suggested that the arena be on the north side of the river. Now, were there people with jealousies on either side? But we said we're going to do the convention center too. But let me tell you what, folks, I must have given 100 speeches all over this county for that thing. And what we got more response for, or why people were supporting it, virtually than anything else, was that you're working together. That you're working together. And people want to see that. There are people who want it all in their town, the bragging rights and all that. But ultimately, the citizens want to see something done, and they want to see you do it together.
Questions unavoidable. Well, I can't avoid it anyway. You merge water systems from the perspective of a few years back in, shall we say, civilian life. Any prospect of a merger of the two cities? Is that?
I don't think so.
I don't either, and I think Warren Stevens, if I can get this mic to turn on, here we go. Warren Stevens gave a speech, who knows how many years ago now, but he actually proposed that we needed to do the merger of the two cities. And from a pure practical standpoint, it probably does make sense. Right after I left the city board the first time, in 1978, I guess it would have been, 75, 6, 7, 8, I was appointed the chair of a committee called the Metropolitan Services Study Commission. And that commission was charged by the Little Rock City Board, although bringing people in from both sides of the river, to talk about things we could do jointly, whether it's, your information systems or 911 calls or MEMS or whatever it might be. And we had actually some topic then. This is long before Warren Stevens gave his speech. But I can tell you without a doubt that there was sentiment to that on both sides of the river. Probably the nastiest calls I got after Warren Stevens' call were from people on the North Little Rock side of the river, because they basically said, no way you're going to make us part of Little Rock. So clearly, it is something that still is a visceral response to something that probably, as Pat says, will not happen in my lifetime.
Well, back in, in the early 80s, I had my own little consulting firm. And I was hired by back then it was Little Rock Chamber and 50 for the Future. There were some talking about merger of the two communities. And at that time, the Little Rock Chamber, Greater Little Rock Chamber, had members on both sides of the river. But they wanted a discussion of it, and they asked me to do an analysis of it. And I did. And it was kind of a twofold look at it, though. The first thing I did was research the history of the two communities and how it all happened. If y'all haven't studied that or read any about it, it's a fascinating story about how the north side of the river, a community called Argenta, was annexed against their will by the city of Little Rock. And they fought it in court. They lost at the court level. And then so Little Rock in 1899, 1900, took over services. They didn't do much of anything. They might put in a stop sign here and there. Didn't do much of anything. They had Fawcett that ran for mayor from Northside, ran for the mayor of Little Rock, got beat. they felt like they weren't getting their full share. And so in 93 at the legislative session, there's this little old bill that doesn't affect anybody but Walnut Ridge and Hoxie. And it was passed, and it allowed that people in one community that abuts another community can de-annex from one and join the other. They pass it, signs it. As soon as they all go home, North Little Rock has established a community, I think it was called North Little Rock, just north of Argenna, and they abutted. And so they called for an election to de-annex from Little Rock and have their own community. And God almighty, if you go back and read the dadgum newspaper coverages, they're calling scalawags and pigwiggles and all kinds of stuff. And they voted de-annex. And the mayor of Little Rock said, take all your stray dogs and dump them north of the river. That's how you got Dogtown. And folks, that animosity, even though the people in that age had died off, they grew up with stories about that. But it's on both sides of the river telling the stories too. And so I showed in that study how you could, over time, save money, be more efficient, do all the things that you think about you want to do in running government. But if you declared and tried to say we're going to have a merger, you get the demagogues on the roof again. And you just draw people further and further away. And so my recommendation was to work on where we can cooperate and get to the areas that we can merge. Like we've got a Central Arkansas transit system, we've got a water system, our emergency communications now are intermeshed, and do those things. MEMS, we've got a premier ambulance service now in this community. And that's what we ought to do. Worrying about having one city government, I just don't think it's worth the time and money and be unsuccessful, because people have their identities and they don't want to do it, and you don't want the demagogues on the roof again.
Yeah, if you look, I mean, where it makes sense, where you've got a broader constituency, or ratepayers, if you want to put it that way, yeah, those are the things that make sense and they work. Excuse me?
Voters.
Well, voters came together and voted for the river project, and one of the things that we did in terms of, because when we got there, all of us, the core of downtowns had an odor to it, if you want to put it that way, and North Little Rock at the same time had always, when I grew up, we didn't have a downtown, to be honest. We had a Penny's and maybe a Western Auto and a few other things, but we borrowed Little Rock's downtown. And so we'd go over to Pfeiffer's and Blast and Christmas, and I mean that was our downtown for a city of 65,000. We didn't have near the kind of downtown that most cities would have because we were adjacent to Little Rock. And not going to go back into the origins like Buddy described, but there was that animosity. But what we did was try to make some sense out of, how we could collectively do things that needed to have a collective approach. And just like Buddy mentioned, we had 2 or 3 times. I think the Diamond Center was one of Little Rock's efforts, and I know Terry Hartwick. Terry had an effort to build the arena out by the Rock Crusher, and it just didn't work. But it seemed like that idea that Buddy talked about together, people felt like the burden would be less, and he took the position that we were going to have 1 penny sales tax for 1 year, and that was it. We were able to go out to the legislature with the help of the chamber and get $20 million, which was a pretty nice carrot. We got that money a little bit early, and we were able to earn some interest on it. So, what we did was try to form partnerships, and those partnerships, it's just like River Rail. We've got an anniversary coming up with River Rail, and each of us but that had a 20%. If any one of the governments would have had a 20% bite, because we got a grant, federal grant that took care of 80%, and Rodney Slater being Secretary of Transportation didn't hurt either. But it couldn't be. It was a hard deal to pass up if you were looking at 1/3 of 20% and you get the kind of transportation development, both economic and transportation, that we were able to get with River Rail. And so all three of us coming together, and I'll have to give Buddy a lot of credit, because just like he said, before, the county took care of the unincorporated areas and the city took care of their jurisdictions. But when he came in and leveraged the county's interest and money, then it made it hard for our constituencies to turn it down. I mean, when I see Beth White and Debbie Ross out there in the audience, when I'd have to go back and try to fund different things, it was a whole lot easier to argue for 1/3 of 20% than it would be to argue for a half or a whole. So the financial aspects of what we were able to do when we went to our councils, and by the way, those city councils and boards and quorum court, are an integral part of what we were able to do.
And let's talk infrastructure. Planning. We had 2020, what's now 2019. Some of it got done, some of it didn't. But
Well, I think the two things that didn't get done, give credit where it got done. I think our highway system, we've accomplished, I think, most of what we outlined on that. I actually went beyond what our initial plans were. We're moving past the 3 lanes per side, 6 lanes. God help us, we're going to have 20 if we're not careful. But I think we've done a good job on that. On the arterials, we still got work to do on some of our arterial network, but we've done well on that. We've made a big impact so far on the goal of trying to make our railroad crossing safer. We dedicated a lot of money toward that. And the couple of areas that one concerns me more than the other. The one that I'm concerned about, but not as much, is in the areas beyond our cities. We had talked about trying to figure out a way, I don't want to say contain, because you can't contain the growth. And that was one of the things that we couldn't do. Sprawl. The sprawl and cost to our citizens in just terms of long-term operational maintenance of our streets or police or fire or water or everything. And we looked at a lot of things we were doing. We looked at Portland, Oregon. And Portland, Oregon has laws where they can set growth boundaries. And in a way, we were trying to do the same. It makes a lot of sense. It allows for growth, but it's a phased kind of growth that a community can evolve into and get done. And well, there's a multi-county too, but in Portland itself, they were able to establish that, and it worked well for them. I think our idea was to try to get that kind of reasonable growth, but it doesn't work. I mean, people are going to build where people want to build, and developers are going to develop. I mean, so that we were not really able to do that. That concerns me, and I think in the future, I think we ought to, what some of our cities are doing now, is really try to make our interior more competitive and get people to take the option of coming back and developing within the boundaries we already have, our city limits lines. And I think some of our cities are trying to do that through, land banks and other things, trying to gather up the stuff. The other one is public transit. We established that we wanted to have an effective regional transit system. And as far as you mean regional beyond Pulaski County, and that's obviously has not happened. And I don't think it will happen. Now, people think, some of my standards past, I'm opposed to highways. I'm not. But the problem you have is, I think that we have a great highway department and they do a wonderful job, but you have to remember their mission is to get cars and trucks from A to Z. When you find yourself at M and all those things are crisscrossing, it has a damaging effect on the livability and ultimately, I think, the competitiveness of a community. And that's where we are. So we need a transit system, but we're not going to get that. Roads have dedicated taxes. I think transit needs a dedicated tax. It needs it. You can have a better bus system so intercity, and intra-city, you can have set up a system. You can afford it. And then you can start looking in really long term and think about regional transportation, both by bus but also by rail. People used to, when I mentioned that, they say, oh, we're not ready for it. We don't have the mass. Well, you don't. But if we had all the money in the hand right today, it'd be 10, 15 years before we could get a ride on it. It just takes that long to get it done. So those are the two areas I think we did not accomplish that I think hopefully we will keep trying and get it done.
Dailey and Hayes.
Yeah, I start thinking about, Buddy mentioned transportation. I know one of the things that I think we were active in is what in some respects is going on now with regard to greenhouse gas emissions. To me, one of the biggest threats, that's challenging this globe, is too much carbon dioxide. And city mayors and county judges, we decided that the federal government wasn't going to take the steps necessary. So I know I started doing things, I'm sure Buddy and Jim did, but to me, that threat was not one that could be we could wait on the federal government to take a move. And I know mayors all across this country, I was active in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, made that one of our strong priorities. And mass transit, takes cars off the road. And if people who are driving and have to drive, and there are a lot that do, like I said, like Buddy said, I'm not objecting to roads, but every person that takes a car or every person that rides mass transit, is one car that's not on the road. So everybody benefits, from folks that can have a good quality transportation system. I mean, one of the things that I know I took a little heat over was, the trails that we were building when we got started. Because I know Buddy and I went on a ride when that's one of the things North Little Rock enjoyed was some good real estate along the river. And one of my goals was connect the Big Dam Bridge or Murray Lock and Dam, to our downtown area. And I think Gene Pfeiffer's out there, and he helped us with the last leg going across, some of the property that he had where we connected it. And then I took Buddy on a ride and
Damn near killed me.
and we went
Not on a
across.
bicycle. We were in his car on his thing that he just cut out the side of the mountain.
Well, and the same thing, we went over an old wood bridge and, in my Crown Victoria that, would bump the windows sometimes when we'd go over it. But, we went back and I said, we need to get to the other side of the river. And, 5 years later with his, financial, we'll say, efforts and working with the Corps. And then again, there were 11 jurisdictions, I think, that signed a memorandum of understanding that were much broader than that, and it didn't touch them. It's obviously Pulaski County, but the main benefit was Little Rock and North Little Rock because of where the bridge touched. But right now, I don't know how many we had, a couple, 3,000 folks that were in the BD 100, and obviously, I know I went to Ruth Ginsburg when she spoke at the arena. I mean, 15,000 folks, and you can't help but take a lot of pride, in the things that we had a chance to be a part of, and yet that pride is because the people of Central Arkansas and even broader are enjoying those.
Have been talking really in the context of Pulaski County, maybe too much, and that's your moderator's fault. But if there's a message that would seem to be in what didn't get done in 2020, and now there's planning for 2050. Jim Dailey, what do you see as the lessons for today's planners, today's?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think that Buddy has hit on part of it, I think, and that is connections with transportation. And I'm taking a little more global picture now that I'm doing the work that I do at the state level, but clearly connections between communities, not just cars and highways and roads, but bicycle trails, hiking trails, ways that you pull small communities together is something that's becoming more important to cities all across the nation. When we took through MetroPlan, we took, 35 or 40 folks to Portland, Oregon to do a 3 or 4 day study of what Portland had done during the previous 25 years to be recognized as a community and a city that has been doing things right. We came back with some ideas and some visions that I think helped us to develop the connections we have to both sides of the river with our bridges. A friend of mine, Steve Russo, described when he was working with the Donaghy Project, described the bridges as the shoestrings, the shoelaces that tie us together. And in reality, that's what they do. So connections that bring people together, and we're able to use that for cars. We're able to use it for bikes and walking and for our trolley system. So the connections are something that's really important. I would love to see us continue to move toward what Portland did, and that is some sort of more regional planning. MetroPlan serves that role in a way for part of it, but clearly there's not the same kind of legislative or legal structure that requires that you go through a planning system like in Portland to be sure that whenever you're making changes to your highways or your rail system or to neighborhood planning and the nodes that you develop to be at these on and off points for your light rail or for people to get on and off the trails. I think some sort of long-term thinking about more of a regional approach to that would be, and with clout to it, I think would be important, and I think would be something we, up to this point, we may have thought about it, talked about it, but we haven't done it.
You're talking about why it's important. Well, when we, in the early 90s, MetroPlan was just not much, to be honest with you. It had run the transit system. We took that out. Then here comes ICE-T, and it gave us the opportunity to look at first, if we'd only looked at it narrowly from what it said, the funds, and that's what got everybody in it, money. This is new money. Congress has said, look, we want y'all to work together in metropolitan areas. Here's a lot of money. And we looked at it, and if you looked at the map, it covered most of Pulaski County, went out a little bit into Faulkner and Saline, I believe, and maybe a little bit more. But as we all talked about it, and we all meaning the three of us, but the staff in MetroPlan and some others, we thought, you don't have a road, and that is primarily road, although it did give us money for transit. You don't build a road to the edge of a city limit and stop. You don't build a highway to the edge of the city limit and stop. That we needed to have these other communities involved in this process. And we began to reach out to them, and they were interested. And for the first time, MetroPlan was kind of evolved out of an effort that got the air base here 100 years ago, nearly 100 years. God, it is nearly 70 years ago. And this was the first time, though, that we started really talking about getting an organization of basically 4 counties together. And with the idea that we'd work together to plan transportation needs and affect them because we did have money coming down the pipe. Well, I think it's even more critical now than it was then. For a lot of reasons, Pat mentioned greenhouse gases. By the way, I give a heads up to Barry Hyde, who's here, I think. Y'all saw in the paper the other day, all of his county buildings are going on solar energy. And buildings are one of the biggest contributors next to highways, I think, of greenhouse gases. But now we've got to look. When we were just beginning to look at this whole climate thing with carbon emissions back then. Well, we're past looking now. If we don't do something, our children and grandchildren are going to be in a heck of a mess. And we can't do it just a city at a time or a county at a time. It's going to have to be multiple counties and even statewide to really have an impact. Carbon doesn't stop at this city. It evaporates to the next county. It gets wind blown, all that. So the importance of having that 4-county and go beyond, I think, what we've done to the effect today and look really at the issues of the day that are standing out or in emergency. You've got to have those people there. And that goes with growth, sprawl, and all that. But more importantly, it's how you're going to develop. It's going to become a more critical factor in transportation and everything else we do.
All three of you have mentioned, use the term greenhouse gases. Obviously mindful of the environmental debates of the day, although there's not much debate, I would venture in the scientific community anyway.
Except in the White House.
Yeah. Do you see, and the need for transit, do you see an increase in the constituency for transit?
Well,
I think there is an increase in it, and I think that Buddy said it earlier, and I agree completely. I mean, we can't just keep kicking this can down the road. I mean, we literally have to take it fully and embrace it and say we're committed to it. And I think we're getting close to that. And I think MetroPlan and its planning, I think the leadership within the county, the other cities, I think will begin to listen more actively and certainly more realistically to the future. If we can have the dedicated funding that goes for transportation and do it on a way that relates to whether it's buses or whether it's light rail or whatever it might be, we can certainly, in many ways, as I mentioned a moment ago, do a better job of making those connections between nodes of population, nodes of commerce, do it more effectively, efficiently, and also cut down on the greenhouse impact.
You know, the one thing that to me, as you think about, the kind of vision I know that I have, and I'm sure Jim and Buddy, share to a large degree, is trying to shepherd our resources and to maximize the quality of life is really what the bottom line is, as I see it. I mean, to get rid of that windshield and those windows in an automobile, I mean, I know that we've all had a chance to travel on some good mass transit systems. We go back to Portland, Atlanta, you go to Denver, Salt Lake City. I mean, on and on. I know they built a light rail out 18 to 20 miles out from downtown Salt Lake City, and the parking lot that they had for folks to park, they thought would fill up in maybe 3 years. It filled up in 3 months because people enjoyed not having to fight that traffic, and they had internet service. And I mean, you can really, improve a person's quality of life. I mean, walking down Main Street, Little Rock or North Little Rock, down Clinton Boulevard, and saying hello to folks. I mean, it just is a better feeling and a better quality of life, than getting in your car and fighting traffic and road rage and all that, and you get home and you chew on your kids and your wife or your husband, however it might be. So I think what I've seen, and I'm not trying to speak for them, but that you really have a much better quality of life. And then when it goes to greenhouse gas emissions, it just all is in one package. It just makes sense. It just makes walking around sense.
Yeah, we've always had a base support here. People say, well, people don't want it. We've at least 3 times we've taken it to the voter, and between 40 and 43% have voted for it. So it's not like that, nobody wants it and nobody understands it. We've not been able to quite convince that another 10% who would have gotten approved it, and we'd have it today. But it's there. But I think if people, the idea is, people say, well, I look at the buses and they're empty. Well, if you look at them some parts of the day, they're full. It's just like if you look at a street, some parts of the day is full, some parts of the day is empty. The problem with our streets and roads and highways now, and you'll notice, as much as I like the highway department, they quit giving up the term congestion, that they're going to improve congestion. What they're now saying is a continuous flow, which means as long as you're going 5 miles an hour, you're continuous flowing. So folks, when you see these projects, you won't hear them say it's going to help congestion anymore. It won't. Congestion is going to get worse. No matter how wide you make the highway, it's going to get worse. But you will continue moving maybe, you know, the I-630, and I got caught a lot of heat for opposing widening that. I didn't oppose the intersection. I didn't oppose widening it down to, I think it's Baptist or Barrow deal. But when they said, let's go and take it on down to University, I said, why? You're just moving the Crench Point a little further downstream to University. And all these arterials, you're going to have to get the city to spend a lot of money because they're going to have more traffic on them. And but the killer to me was both the Metro Plan and the Highway Department did a traffic deal. It will speed up the drive time 1 to 2 minutes. $60 million or more, it's going to be about 80 or 90 million, that project for 2-minute times.
I guess that goes to the question about mindset, that maybe I should have used that term anyway. But I had someone suggest the other day that it's now called the Arkansas Department of Transportation. Should we go back to calling it the Department of Highway Department?
No, I don't think so. I think, you know, that obviously would be a step backwards as far as I'm concerned. Now, the governor, is the key in many respects because he appoints the highway commissioners. Now, they serve for 10 years each, and so I think there are 5 of them, if I'm not mistaken, and they serve for 10 years apiece. So there's some lag in terms of their tenure. But I think that, down at the Capitol, we're going to have to, as we try to pick a new governor in the next several years and a new president. I mean, the one thing I like about Joe Biden is he rode Amtrak back and forth, from Delaware, where, every day, I think. I mean, this country will not be able to continue with the economic engine that it has without an efficient transportation system, both for people and for goods and services. And I don't know how often you may drive between Little Rock and Memphis, but there are probably more trucks than there are cars on that route. And it's scary. So we've got to find a way, to move goods and services, and my feeling is rail is the answer, but I mean, what's his name, Warren Buffett, buy, a rail line, because, that to me is one of the ways that investing dollars will give us more benefit, because we can't build our way out of it via highways.
Certainly locally, it wants, though, more funding stream, does it not?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely is important that we have a funding stream. I think back to your question about DOT versus Highway Department, I agree with what Pat said. I think at least even if they have not mentally completely made the paradigm shift, I think what it really says is that they're moving toward recognizing that transportation is more than just roads. And there are opportunities, if you really push them, to get a little bit more access and interest and even funding on things that relate to everything from sidewalks to bike trails to you name it. So I think there's some opportunities there. I want to mention again what I was talking about a moment ago in connecting communities, and this is where I think with a little bit of political clout, the Highway Department, the Department of Transportation can really come in and be effective. I mean, there's a goal just like the Katy Trail up in Missouri to develop the Delta Heritage Trail, which could basically go all the way from Memphis to New Orleans ultimately, and connect small communities all along the way with services that support cycling or hiking or outdoor activities. The Southwest Trail, Judge Hyde has been really active in supporting that. I'd love to see that one finished so that I can ride a bicycle between here and Hot Springs before I'm too old to be able to do that. But clearly, I do think that the name, if nothing else, is a movement in the right direction.
Buddy Villines, give you the last one on that.
Well, the problem the highway department has is all their money is road money, highway money. They can't. Yeah, there's a little slivers that they've got, a little flexibility that they can do. They added transportation to the title. It had nothing to do with transit. They took over the rail planning. They took over some river transportation planning. And they did that in lieu of, in part because there were crossovers and things they wanted to get a handle on, but the other reason they did it, by getting those federal dollars to run those programs, they get some administration money. So while I'm hopeful that just having the name in it will get them thinking even broader, until you get to Congress and Congress acts and puts some money in the right chute, they're not going to go much beyond what they've got, because by law, most of their money is tied to highways, period. And that's their mission. I mean, they're not going to, I don't care if you call them highway department or the transportation department, that's what they're going to do is highways.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know whether they would be delighted to accept your questions, but they agreed to do so. I think there's a microphone at the end of each aisle here. And if anyone would like to pose a question to our amigos, you're welcome to offer one. And I think, yeah, we have a question.
We're in trouble.
You're not in trouble. You gentlemen have given us projects that have been tremendous for the quality of life in our community and also to attract tourism. And we owe you a debt of gratitude. But I do have one little question. That is that in all of this infrastructure, we have an Arkansas River Trail with a very big gap in it, and that is where it crosses the Dillard property. And you gentlemen are the elder statesmen of our community. You speak with some authority, and I would ask you to take on the project of imploring Bill Dillard to allow us to complete our Arkansas River Trail. Thank you.
Any comment necessary, exactly. Thank you, Gene, because I agree with you, and that's one that in my closing days when I was leaving office, I was threatening everything from condemnation, you name it, to see if we could move something forward there, and we're still just kicking that one down the road. But I agree, collectively or however, if we can get that done, it's one of the most important links to the river trail that there is.
What side of the river is that on, Jim?
Spoke up.
I understand. Yeah, I just heard there's another effort being put together to try to move that forward. And of course, Dillard's is on one side and Episcopal School is on the other side. And I think because of the bridge now that's built, we're pretty well committed to the Dillard side in terms of making that connection. Even with that issue, to me, as you mentioned the Southwest Trail, as we talk about, I know one of the things that I did, I think there's even a picture in the brochure about the Levy Trail that goes out toward Camp Robinson, and we want to go on toward Sherwood and Jacksonville, not only down toward Hot Springs. I know there's a number of times that I've ridden out toward the airport and gone on out, in that area. I think that's where the Grand Fondo, is. So, we don't need to focus, in my mind, we need to focus on the Dillard's aspect, but I think there's still broader areas that we can accomplish in terms of trail development. I think that Levy Trail, Mayor Smith, if I'm not mistaken, is another segment of that's going to be under construction pretty soon and go out to Kiel. I know, it's exciting what we have, and it's exciting about the opportunities, that are in front of us. and we just don't need to stop.
Upon that just a little bit, Mayor, clearly right now with what's going on in Northwest Arkansas and what they're doing with their trails, several hundred miles of trails that they've put together up there in a very short period of time, they have become a tourist mecca, drawing people from all over to come up there for events. I know the judge has our 100-miler, which he started, which has grown just like the Little Rock Marathon has grown, and those kinds of activities. The more we have trails available for them, the more we're going to draw people. But quality of life, attraction, tourism is clearly focused right now all across the nation on building trails. And so we need to do everything we can to do the best we can.
Yeah, and you know, the opportunity, Southwest Trail, when we first looked at that, was just kind of one part of it. If you take a line and draw it from northeast Arkansas to southwest Arkansas, that's known as the Southwest Trail. Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, all those folks coming through Arkansas got on that to go to Texas. Now, if that's not a historic opportunity, and with what the judge is doing now, we'll have a segment that gets off of it a little bit, but we'll have a segment going that way. You could do that, and let me tell you, people on trails, a neighborhood will walk a 2-mile trail. The city will have a 15, 20-mile trail. You get to 50-mile trails, and then you start drawing national and international visitors. And that's money in your pocket.
One other trail, too, that I know I had a chance to be a little bit active on, and that's the Trail of Tears. And without going into any lengthy history, I was told, because we've got one of the largest collections of Native American literature out at UALR, as a matter of fact. And one of the most important sites on the trails, because there were like 5 Trails of Tears that moved 5 civilized tribes, from the southeastern part of the country to Oklahoma and Texas. There's stories to be told about that are just incredible. And actually, they came over from Memphis, and then I think it's Cherokees and Choctaws and Chickasaws and Seminoles and 5 tribes. But one of the things that we have is that there were more of all 5 of the different kinds of different tribes that came by, came across Arkansas and on down to Texas and on over to Oklahoma because of the river, and as well as because coming over from Memphis. And so we've got a lot of history with that aspect of our country's, in many respects, shame.
Steve, can I hit on one more item about the bicycling and the impact it has on communities? The Walton Foundation certainly headed up now, the effort up there by the 2 grandsons. They did an economic impact study for 2017, the last one. They're going to be updating this, but for 2017, mountain biking alone had a $137 million impact on Northwest Arkansas.
Thank you. My question is regarding the Big Dam Bridge and the trail, because I've done presentations on the floodplain management aspect. And one question in particular is I came across a City of Lincoln, Nebraska study about how much health initiatives actually save in medical cost. And I was wondering if y'all had came across any surprising stats like that. But the second question I have too is when you go up to the Razorback Greenway or when you're here on the river trail, often somebody like me that walks has to deal with the bicyclists that may be going a little bit faster than they should. How is the plan related to the interaction between your people that walk versus your bicyclist?
May I answer the first part?
Of course.
If you look online, go to the Walton Foundation, you'll find that $137 million economic impact in part relates to health benefits. Now, as far as how we regulate bikes and walkers, that's another topic.
Yeah, bikes are to walkers what cars are to bikes. And until it's an educational thing. And when you add bikes to a sidewalk or a trail, people get confused. You know, the bikers think they have the right command of on your left. Well, the walkers think which left. You know, and it's difficult. I don't know. We've tried striping. We've tried out at Two Rivers Park. We even set aside a stripe for just walkers on one side, but then you got bikes coming at each other in the same direction. And the only way it's going to be resolved is people get educated enough, are out there enough, and are courteous enough to do it. I don't know any other way to do it.
I mean, I think Buddy hit right on it when he said education. I mean, those trails are for all of us. You know, they're for people who are in wheelchairs, they're for folks that, you know, are walkers, or for bikers, and we got different kinds of bicycles with recumbents, and so you know, it's a matter of education. It's a matter of courtesy. It's a matter of recognizing that, you know, there's a possibility of serious injury, and the same relationship has to do with cars and bicycles. You're supposed to have 3 feet, you know, between you and a bicyclist. So, you know, I know that I rode, you know, from my house over to McCain Mall, going down McCain, and you know, I didn't go up the other side of McCain very fast, but it's a matter of you know, actually, and there's education. I went through a league cycling instructor course, and so it's a matter of education. It's a matter of practice. It's a matter of realizing, you know, things like bicyclists are literally vehicles in terms of right of way, and there's a lot of folks that don't know that, and we're pretty new in that regard in many respects, but and you got to have foresight. I mean, I know I was going down, and I'll tell you a little secret. One of the things that, you know, there's a long down slope on the Big Dam Bridge on both sides of Little Rock and the one in North Little Rock. Well, if you ever wonder why there's a curve at the end of the Presidential Library Bridge, you know, that was an idea that I had to try to slow the bicyclists down, you know, because, you know, I knew there was going to be a lot of, we'll say, mixing of pedestrians as well as bicyclists, and you go down the curve a little bit slower than you go down a straight shot. So there's a little bit of design aspects as we move into it, and we're not going to build a new Big Dam Bridge or off-ramps more than likely, but there are some construction things that you can do that'll help integrate, you know, walkers and bicyclists and other people who use it, and we got to keep that in mind.
I want to reiterate what Mr. Gene Pfeiffer said. Thank you for your leadership. This city is incredibly much more livable than when I first got out of college in the early 90s, and it's a great place. Thank you for that. You guys spoke about rail. I'd like for you to comment a bit on the future of river rail. You know, I think that's a very unique attribute and asset of a city our size. 2 questions. One, do you have any regrets sort of casting that, and I don't know that you gentlemen had anything to do with that, casting that more as a sort of throwback trolley look versus a serious transportation look, number one, because I think in some ways that sort of changes people's perception of that, maybe not for the better. And number 2, what do you see as potential future growth for that and expansion of that?
Well, let me revisit with you what our thinking was. Number 1, we wanted to have, remember this is 1990? No, it was 15 years ago. So it's in the middle of the 90s when we finally decided, really got to working for it, and probably took us 6 years to get it started, whatever. And we knew that you had the arena going in, we believed the presidential library going in. It hadn't been announced, but we thought it'd be somewhere. And we thought, if you look at an old board I used to take around in speeches, where you got the baseball field now, it just said public use something. that we knew we had the hotels. So our number one thing at that time, realizing that we didn't have enough money to cover the whole downtown, was in the very core, create a transit system, a trolley system, streetcar system, that connected all those high points, or at least got within a block of them. Second, why the vintage replica? Well, I think our thinking, at least in mine, was that everything we were trying to do would be an attraction. That it would be something else that would draw people to the downtown. And we did for months, and still do, have people from outside of Pulaski County or from the far out in Pulaski County come down, grandparents bring their grandkids and let them ride the trolley car. As far as transportation, the other final point, those replica trolley cars who have basically all the technology that what they call a modern streetcar that looks like one that's built in 1930, modern streetcar have all the technology they have, but they cost half the amount of money. That modern streetcar, when we were dealing with it, would have cost us $2.5 million. Is that right? Yeah, $2.5 million. Those trolley cars, vintage replicas, were $900,000. Okay. Now, one other final thing is on the second part of your question. We anticipated that in the future, from then, that we'd be talking about extending those out in spokes in different directions out as it got needed. We also anticipated there would be development along those lines, and there has been. And people are using it for transportation means. The one thing it needs right now, immediately, I think they made a mistake when they started charging. You go to the cities around the country, and there's an interior core that you don't pay for transit. And when you did that, you lost riders. And so when they removed it, now they're back up to a ridership that's really going well. And I think in the future, at least in that core of transit, needs not to be charged for, and then look to see how you can expand it.
Let me make a couple quick points on that, because Buddy's absolutely right. We were hopeful that, and there's several things that fixed rail does. One of the larger things, in addition to transportation, is economic development. And those cars are, in fact, I think we've got in the several billion maybe of dollars in terms of economic development that's gone around. You throw in Dickie Stevens, and you throw in, the things over in Little Rock and the arena and on and on. So a big part of it is economic development. The second thing is you're absolutely right. It was our, desire, that this be the foundation for rail expansion out. I'd love to see a train going out along the river on the south side on out toward Perryville. There's a lot of development. I think West Little Rock, and as well as going to Jacksonville. Now, one of the things that I know, that we as MetroPlan were very strong in our opinion, and that was when they were doing that corridor out toward Jacksonville. We wanted to make sure that if we were able to in the future, that corridor in the middle was available for rail. And so those bridges were constructed in a way that would accommodate that. That was something that we were, I recall being very much of an advocate, for doing that in a way that would accommodate that expanded use. And those kinds of cars, back to Portland real quick, and then, they had a bunch of money allocated for the Mount Hood Freeway out in Portland. And they were able to, at that time, and I think this was the early 90s, were able to redirect that money to tear down an interstate or a freeway that was right along the Willamette River. And then they also did a light rail out about 18, 19 miles north to a community out there. And Portland downtown had less than 5% of the economic business when they started that. And that rail ended up with some of the other things they did in terms of mandating, retail kind of stuff on the ground floor and other things. It had over 40%. Now, this was way back when we went there in the early 90s of the downtown business. And so it really brought Portland back to life. And I think it's on its way to have done some significant movement here in the central part of Arkansas, in Little Rock and North Little Rock. I mean, we've got, First Orion is now building a 5-6-story, one of our tallest buildings in North Little Rock right now, and going to have 300 employees down there. So more and more, I think, some of what we were able to do, and I'm not going to cite the apartment complexes, Mayor, that are going up, or the town square that will be opening up sometime pretty soon. You always look back to what's best for people on the feet, and that's a real benefit to be able to add to the quality of life when that happens.
Steve, just
I have a question on the lady, I'm sorry.
let me just pick up on that 1 second before. Then just go ahead and add to what Pat is saying, and in part it added some character to a trolley system as opposed to the other type of light rail system. Secondly, it was just a starting point. And I think what Pat has already said, whether it's the hotels downtown or whether it's development of a commercial nature in both our downtowns, the anchor of that rail absolutely tells people that's going to be there for a while, and we can put some money into it, and we will stay there. Next steps, in my mind, even with the trolley, much like New Orleans or San Francisco or other places, can be to the airport. It can be up Main Street. It can be farther out to Park Hill. It can be out to the, Capital neighborhood area. So there's all kinds of opportunities for us without getting into the high-speed light rail. But that's ultimately farther down the road too.
To that is, well, you were asking about what we could do. One thing we could do, well, we can't afford it right now, but if you had one more trolley car on that line that's running now, you would get more riders. Because right now it's a 15-minute wait, up to 15 minutes. And it's been shown if it's more than 7 or 8 minutes, people aren't going to sit there in the heat or the cold to get on. If you had one more rail car on there, I think you'd see a big jump in the ridership.
Question for the lady.
Yeah, thank you for addressing sprawl and some of the concerns about how we're planning our communities for the future. My question was, having worked on the Lake Maumelle Watershed Task Force, what are the things that we're doing or can do from a public policy standpoint going forward to protect areas like the Lake Maumelle Watershed and some of the regional parks and recreational areas that we have, so that we make sure they're preserved and continued for the next generation?
Well, I think what the county adopted does put into the protection in the immediate watershed, the protections that are needed. Now, beyond that, I think in Little Rock side, the extraterritorial planning they can add to that. But it took, if you were part of it, it started in, I'm trying to remember, 93, nearly 14 years to get that thing finally adopted. And I think, I'll put it up against any watershed plan in the country. And it's got the ordinances in place to do it. Now, will that last? It's always going to have to be vigilant. Always. Because people, and that's why I tried to tell the people that lived out there who were so against it, they were saying, we're not going to do anything. And I believed them. They weren't going to do anything to hurt that watershed. But their heirs might. Or they'd get in a terrible financial situation and they'd sell it to somebody who would. And that's you still are going to have to be aware of that as time passes and ever vigilant. I mean, that water is our lifeblood.
Well, and we've all seen what happened on the Buffalo River, and fortunately, there seems to be a remedy for that, even though it's a painful one and never should have even gotten to that point. But I think you're absolutely right in asking the questions, and I also believe that the public, much like they're more concerned about our air quality, are beginning to be more and more sensitive to what happens to our water supply as well.
I think the lady has a question.
Hi. A two-part question for you. Looking back on the past 25 years and knowing, if you knew then what you know now, what is the one thing that you might do differently? And then the second part of the question is, what advice do you have for planning the next 25 years?
Personal life or? I'm not sure. I think we were at a great time to be in the offices we were in, and I think we found ourselves. And I'll be honest with you, I think Bill Clinton getting elected helped, not so much as a deal about what the government was going. People asked me, we had all kinds of reporters asking us all questions. What's Clinton going to do for Little Rock and Pulaski County? And I said, look, because there was talk, some of you may remember, there's going to be a great investment, military investment in Camp Robinson, all kinds of jobs. And I said, if he brought the library here, that was gold, because you don't move a presidential library. A changing federal administration could move anything else. So he did that. But what it did was, people all of a sudden said, whether they liked Bill or not, hey, we had a president elected from our state. We ought to be thinking about things. And, when we would get together and pass the arena, which no one thought we could do, and then we were doing other things, and people started asking for more, wanting more. But, it used to be, and this is honest God truth, in Arkansas and in this area, people say, we can't do that because it's just little old Arkansas, little old Little Rock, this doesn't happen here. And it changed I think with Clinton's election, but when we passed the arena, we started doing some other things, people got to the point, well, what's next? And we were able to catch that wave. So anything else we've done, I think the only thing I regret that we weren't able to do is get that dedicated funding for transit.
As well, and say that two things. Number one, I think we stumbled early when I was on the city board before I became mayor even. We saw that growth was moving west, and I think that we stumbled on how we dealt with that. And then bringing full circle back to the point about what Buddy just finished with, I think looking to the future, if we can look truly holistically at planning and how we work together out beyond the county borders, using MetroPlan maybe as the stepping off point, but at the same time ways that we can collectively work together for the betterment of a better overall Central Arkansas. Northwest Arkansas, even though they have their struggles forever, they've had that Northwest Arkansas Council, which has the 4 cities up there, which basically have a pact of working together. And I think that having that kind of leadership, much like we had Joe Ford, if we can have that kind of leadership that will legislatively, as well as business-wise, as well as citizen-wise, come together around things that are for the betterment of the whole, then I think we can look to the future with a proud hat 25 years from now.
One of the things that I responded to whenever anybody would ask me, what question do you get asked more than any other? And during those 24 years, the question I'd get asked more than any other is, Mayor, how are we going to pay for it? And one of the things that I found is that people will put a burden on themselves if you communicate with them, if you explain it to them, and if they're interested in having it. We lost a few and we won a few, and yet at the same time, you've got to keep stepping up to the plate and challenging, because in many respects it's going to come down to either a city council, and the city council is going to be reflective of their wards or their districts, but it's how do we couple together a financial approach, like the arena, again, like I mentioned, $20 million with the state. When we did Dickey Stevens, Warren Stevens donated the land, $6-7 million if we'd build a ballpark. And our voters, followed suit with about $28 million to build a stadium. So, I mean, there's ways that you need to put together, in my opinion, that give the voters an opportunity to realize it's just not going to be their burden, but it's a collective effort by the private and the public and themselves. So I think that's a challenge, but it's a challenge that's achievable.
To this gentleman, thank you for your patience.
Quite all right. Thank you very much. Out of my first scholarship monies that I received after graduating from high school in 1981, I went out and purchased a bicycle. It was a shop right there at the corner of Chester and 7th Street. And at the time, I didn't really think about it from the standpoint of transportation. It was something that I simply enjoyed doing. And so I would travel from my home at 22nd and Chester Street and ride to UALR. Shortly thereafter, I joined the military, and after a couple of years, I then went on and re-entered school in Tallahassee, which I often think of as Tallahassee and Little Rock almost being like twin cities, very much alike in landscape and geography. I purchased another bicycle. However, as I became older, I rode a lot less. Not as athletic as I used to be. Returning home in Little Rock in 2003, I found some of the streets had changed. Lanes had become adjusted to allow for bike lanes. And I began to wonder, who made these decisions to do this? The only thing I could think of was, well, this is a change, and whether I was in agreement with it as a taxpayer or not, it's happening again on my side of town. And when I hear you gentlemen speak of these different trails, and then the highway department, and what I remember as a child in terms of how Interstate 630 affected the community that I grew up in, and the 9th Street corridor, where my grandparents had both a barbershop and a beauty salon and some kind of 5 and dime store, and how that all went away because of I-630. Those bike lanes remind me of the same thing. So today in 2019, I'm asking the question, well, how do you bring the entire community in on this idea? Because I don't see a lot of black people riding bicycles in the neighborhoods where the bike lanes are. It seems almost elitist, because when I purchased a bike back in 1981, it cost almost $600 for a good bike. And I priced one the other day, and it was almost $1,000. And I was saying, oh my God, can everybody do this? So my question is, after setting that up and give you some background, how do you promote this so that, I wouldn't say everybody, but more people can participate in what they're both paying for and what's supposed to be accessible to them?
One of the most interesting things is that, have you ever heard of a fellow by the name of Major Taylor?
I know the story very well.
Major Taylor, and I know, in fact, there was a Major Taylor group that came over and rode in the Big Dam Bridge, Big D 100. And I'm pretty sure there's a Major Taylor club or chapter here in the Little Rock area, Little Rock, North Little Rock area. But, you're absolutely right that those trails, are open to everybody. And it seems to me that I see more and more folks of all sorts of nationality and race and background. Just for those of you who don't know, Major Taylor was an international athlete in the 1890 to 1910, was a world champion, fastest bicyclist in the world, literally, on what they call a velodrome kind of track. And to read his story is just a real inspiration about, what, not only what he faced and what happened, to him, but the fact of his talent and his persistence and the pride that he had in representing our country in a global arena, and how well he did.
Respond to how you get involved. The cities have planning departments. Both cities, I think Little Rock's gotten bike-friendly community designation. I know North Little Rock had. And that is a process where they go through the planning departments and they begin to identify routes, some routes being mentioned by people who are using those routes to get to and from work, or to get go downtown, and just by observation. Bike-friendly community requires a certain level of bicycle lanes, like you're referring to, that have to be scattered throughout the city. You just don't go in and make some of them available for one neighborhood and you don't make them available for another neighborhood. You can't do it like that. In the county, we would, most of ours came from bicyclists who would say, please make a room for us out there on that county road, because we're about to get killed by cars running over us. And so we did that. So there is a way. The main thing, like if you're in Little Rock, I'd go to the planning department and just ask them how they made the decisions on what streets, and they'll tell you.
Picking up on that, I would completely agree with what Buddy is saying, and the rules, the way they're set up, do require, whether it's 12th Street or Fair Park Boulevard or whatever it might be that goes through different demographic parts of the community, that those are there for everyone to use. Now that said, we experience or sense the same kind of thing at the state level with smaller numbers of minority population that are hikers or bicycle riders or get outdoors for nature type of activities. And so one of the things that we're doing at the state level with the advertising dollars that the citizens provide through lodging taxes statewide is making certain that in all of our advertising that goes out anywhere, that we have representation of females, people of color, and not just one sort of stereotypical look. So it's clear that we have to be more open, more clear in our evidence of openness for people to enjoy it. And then probably, like Buddy says, working with planning departments is good, but maybe even beginning to visit with your legislators. You got some great legislators that are really interested in these trails too. See what kinds of things can be done to maybe potentially provide bicycles for people. I know there are bicycles for kids that Ron King has, and bicycles are available for young people free of charge. He gives away a couple of thousand every year. So there's an opportunity, I think, for connecting with people that typically might say it's too expensive, or maybe I'm not welcome.
But
I'll try to squeeze one more in, Natalie, if I can. This gentleman's.
oh, I'm sorry.
And this will be the last one of the night. I'm sorry about that. I'm not so sure that this is so much a question as possibly an observation. I hear the discussion about bicycles and mass transit, and I agree with those. We've got to look at global warming and all of those factors. But what is the incentive for Joe Q. Public to ride a bus or a train when I can just get in my car in the garage and drive right to where I want to go to work? All these discussions I'm hearing about mass transit make a lot of sense. They're good. But at the personal level, I haven't heard any discussion about the incentive
to take advantage of mass transit, ride a bicycle. Why should I ride a bicycle when I can get in my car and go directly to where I want to go? So I think that that's something that we need to think about. There's a paradigm shift there that has to occur before we should invest large dollars into mass transits. I mean, we need to have them, but we need to talk about that paradigm shift of making the incentive there to take advantage of this.
You have to have a good system, a transportation system, for people to really believe that it's better for me or that's an option for me in addition to hopping in my car. Same way with trails and all. They have to be available, connections, have to be places where you can lock up a security bicycle, have to be ways where you can take a shower when you get to work. I mean, we have a lot of people that work in the Big Mac right there behind the Capitol that ride bicycles to work every day, and we have facilities to accommodate that. So it's really having a system in place.
And, you know, it's always going to be a choice. And I'm not sure it's paradigm shift or if somebody gives it a chance, like in bus transportation. And you're right, we need a system in place though that provides convenience. Not taking you up to the front door, but most people don't get are not people take their car from the garage directly to where they've got to go to work. Most people might have to find a parking place and walk some considerable distance sometimes, or pay, $45, $50 a month for parking. You just don't have free parking everywhere like you used to. I don't think, even if you had a system that was just really coefficient, that you would get more than 20% of people who are driving cars now to get on the bus. That's 20% less cars out on the street. And so it gives people, giving people the option is where the paradigm shift will come. You can't say, you know, y'all will ride this system today when it takes an hour for them to wait for the bus. It won't work. And people say we need to run government more like this. Well, what would government business do if they had a system? They'd say, well, we're losing money. Well, our typical response has been, we'll just go routes where you lose drivers. Or we'll raise fares, you lose drivers. So when are you going to make the commitment to invest in the system so we can get a return on the investment? That's where we are. We're either going to get a return on the investment or drop it. I mean, it doesn't make sense the way we're doing it now.
One of the things that I know, you know, that we started doing, you know, a number of years ago, and that is, you know, when I see somebody waiting on a bus, this was in the 90s or mid early 90s, you know, they almost looked like they were embarrassed just to stand out there. And the second thing, they didn't have any place, you know, a little shower came up. So we started building bus shelters. And I know before I left, you know, and I think they've done it now, is if you know, I mean, the thing I hated when I rode the bus is I go and I wouldn't know how long it would take for the bus to show up. And now, you know, there's a system in place where you know when the bus is going to show up. Even with limited financial commitment we have with our bus system, is sort of a contribution, I assume. Mayor, with the same approach it was with us, that, you know, City of Arkansas Transit goes to the three main jurisdictions, Little Rock's the biggest, North Rock the second largest, and, you know, they come up in front of the mayor and make a plea, and, you know, the council acts on the budget that the mayor has, and with the board. But I think what we've got to do, and I think we're doing it, you know, is to try to let people try it, because now we have, you know, bus shelters. Now we have dependability in scheduling when you know that the bus is going to be there within a few minutes of a certain time at a bus stop. Now, I don't think what we're trying to do is just like we're talking about, shift everybody to buses or shift everybody to bicycles. You know, there are folks that live in certain places that, you know, that don't have that option, or maybe too far away. I think the main thing that we want to do in this community, and I think most communities, in terms of local officials, is give people a choice. And make those choices as reasonable as we can with the financial ability that we have. And like I said, I'm much more likely to go to a bus shelter at a certain time if I know that bus is going to be there than when there wasn't shelter and then when I just kept my fingers crossed and I didn't just miss one.
I think during our time is up. As a matter of fact, we ran a little bit past our allotted time. I want to encourage you and all who are interested in this discussion and the issues about it to please go to the Metro Plan website. And I might point out that Tam's predecessor and I had a chat a few days ago, and it was a delightful exchange. My participation in it notwithstanding, but there was a lot of wonderful reminiscing and a lot of urban philosophy in there as well. And the very fact that you came out tonight suggests that you would probably find it beneficial. Horizon 2020, available too on the website. All of us up here are over 30, so we need our sleep. Thank you.